Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Black and Beautiful Chit Chat Connections. It is a pleasure to be here with you today. And as you guys can see, I have another guest. And in case you guys haven't noticed, my guests get juicier and juicier every episode. So today, it's such a pleasure to have this person here. I'm going to introduce you in a second. But before that, I want to do some light housekeeping with you guys. This episode is called Observant, the process of patience. And I'm going to talk to you guys. We're going to talk to you guys a little bit about how that came about. And if you have not caught our last episode where I responded to Kanye West and responded to Dick Gregory, a video that he released 12 years ago that is still relevant, take some time, watch it. Also recognize that this is a professional platform with an authentic twist. We're here uplifting the voices of people of color in the workplace. We're talking about different types of ideologies, different ways to approach things. But most importantly, we're using terms that perhaps you know or you don't know. And just remember, our very first episode, I laid the foundation for you. So if you guys need some extra reinforcement, please go back to our first episode and get that, because we are moving quickly and we're talking authentically. So thank you so much. If you have not hit the subscribe button, hit that button, hit the like button so we can get through the algorithm. And we are here with you today in full force with Observant, the process of patience, with my beautiful guest, Shalain Garcia. And the crowd goes wild. Shalain, I am so happy to have you here. It is a pleasure to be with you. Can you I'll let you go first. Can you give us, I'm always doing that, guys. But can you give us a little bit of introduction and background about yourself? And then I'll share my beautiful story about you.
First off, let me just start by saying thank you for inviting me to this amazing platform. I am so excited for our conversation today. I'm looking forward to this conversation just like I do all our conversations, because you already know how we get busy.
Every day.
I'm talking and getting in the nitty gritty, so I'm super excited. But by way of my background, I have degrees in criminal justice and psychology. And so my passion has always been for criminal justice and has shifted in more recent years to youth justice, and really trying to combat the fact that our youth of color are sort of predestined to be system involved simply because of the pigmentation in their skin. And so what I do on a daily basis really is to work to combat that with localities through policy and programming and technical assistance, because it's really interesting how people can say we have all of these problems, but they don't really know how to or really want to be honest about what it takes to fix them. And so an integral part of what I do also is imposing this notion of healing and understanding that it's time to really stop just having conversations, but make commitments to change, and understanding that generational harm has occurred and is still occurring. And for people to fix the system and system actors to be on the side of fixing things, we have to first acknowledge the harm that has been done. So that's what I do on a daily basis and in our conversations all the time.
Well, I mean, I just got goosebumps. I don't know about y'all, but like I said, the guests just keep getting juicier and juicier. Do you hear the excellence that is coming through your screen and your speakers right now? I hope y'all felt that. All right. Eloquence, the ability to articulate systemic issues that are happening to our youth. I mean, we connected instantly, and we have these conversations. And guys, feel me, Shalain and I don't always agree on things, right? But we definitely have a foundational view about how we better our communities and get other people on board with us so that we can have that, like she said, that generational healing that we need. I met Shalain moonlighting with an organization that she is a board member on, and I had to interview her before. So this is not my first time interviewing her, just interviewing her on my platform now. And I was like, I feel like my audience would literally be blown away by you. And from that, we sparked to have this friendship. And like she said, we talk about this stuff every time we get together. We're texting each other, we're bouncing ideas off of each other. We are really building a community around this type of work, because I want to validate all of you out there who are doing this work and feeling harmed in the workplace. Yeah. You are not alone. You are not alone. Okay. And I'll go on for days, but Shalain is dope. And I can't wait till you guys get to see this piece of her, this side of her. Now, the reason for this particular topic is because one of the first times that I had a in-depth conversation about who Shalain is, she shared with me this very interesting view. So I said to her, I was like, you know, this organization that you're a board member on could really use some help in terms of their racial equity lens. And I was like, you should just go into the board meeting like guns blazing, like me. And Shalain was like, I'm sorry, Charlene. I'm more observant and patient. And that stuck with me. And I was like, could you explain what that means to me? Like, what that means to you? And she was like, she gave me this eloquent answer, like how she just introduced herself. And I was blown away. So I couldn't think of anyone better to do this and provide this type of strategy to our audience, like, and the people who are following us. Like, they need to hear this. They really need to hear this. So I'm super excited, and I want to start this off really quickly with our icebreaker question. You ready, Shalain?
I'm ready.
Okay, so if you had one tool that you could bring into a decision-making boardroom, what would it be? And this tool could be literal or figurative.
Ooh, that is a good one. Honestly, I probably would bring, you know, it's funny, so it's interesting that you asked me this, because the number one tool I would bring, and it's a tool that I carry in everything that I do, is exactly what we're talking about today, and that's patience. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when you're in a decision-making space, there are time crunches, there are deadlines and things of that nature. So all the time you don't have the ability to really do the investigation that you need to make the best decision, understanding the consequences, but also the unintended consequences of what you're about to enact. And so for me, patience becomes a key tool that I have to navigate any sort of decision that I'm making. So patience is a tool that I just carry all the time. So it's apropos that you and I'm not trying to be cliche, y'all. It's just that's the first thing that popped in my mind. I don't want to be extra deep. That's the first thing that really popped in my mind, and something that I really live by.
I'm cracking up. She said, I don't want to be extra deep. Well, anyway, anybody who's following this platform knows we get deep. We put on our scuba gear, honey, and we dive deep. So that is just the cusp of, you know, what we're going to discuss today. But I really appreciate that you bring patience, and patience is literal and figurative in some ways, right? Like, you can argue both sides for that particular tool. So I appreciate that. So guys, let's get into the format really quickly, because as you can see, she's about to blow our minds. So, so we're going to get into the format today. As you know, when I have a guest, I love to have a format, but we are going to remain authentic in this space. I just want to give you guys what we'll be talking about today. So our format is this: trying my patience. Shalain says she has a lot of it. She got the patience of Job. Some of us don't. So we're going to discuss that, Invited to the cookout. Who gets invited? Did you get your invitation?
I don't know. It's in the mail, I guess.
It's in the mail. And then we're going to close out with bring your calculator and do the math. Guys, put on your scuba gear. As my favorite minister, Kevin, look, I'm trying to say Kevin Samuels, because I was talking about him last night. Wow.
Don't get us started, please.
You know, anyway, he creeped up in there, but Kevin L.A. Ewing is my favorite minister from the Bahamas. And yes, I guess I'm biased, but he says, put on your scuba gear, because we are going to dive deep today. Guys, let's get into it. Trying my patience. So, Shalain, when you hear the term observant, so you talked to us a little bit about what tool you would bring in. Now we're going to go into like a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear the term observant, like what is the first thing that comes to your mind?
When I hear the term observant, the first thing really that comes into my mind is intentionality. Because in order to be observant, there's some intention behind it. There's a difference between watching and observing. I can watch anything, right? And just pick up little things. But if I'm being observant, I'm being keen about what I'm looking for. So there's a level of intentionality that you have to have.
Ooh, okay. So observant, right? So there's this article on LinkedIn, right? I didn't go too deep. I didn't go to a scholarly article, which we do here. But I said, let me just type in what does being observant look like in the workplace. And the first article that popped up was an article from LinkedIn. And so the article is called "Being Observant in the Workplace Can Prevent Accidents." Mm-hmm. So they described observance in the workplace to be being aware of your surroundings, looking around and identifying workplace hazards that could cause harm, looking for ways to reduce or eliminate said hazards and implement them, right? So you're reducing to eliminate, and then you're implementing how to not inflict harm. And then you take time before starting a task to stop and look around your work area. Mm-hmm. Now, I know y'all might be like, okay, this article seems very vague. Like, what does this mean? It sounds like what are they hazmat folks who need to go through their training, right? But I wanted to use this article to help us better understand the act of observance and patience in the workplace and how that translates to a person who comes from a historically ignored background, identifies as Black, Latina, Hispanic, Asian, our LGBTQ plus community, right? I want us to talk about what observance means in terms of actionable ways that people of color interpret it. So observance, you said, Shalain, for you to be observing, you're intentional. So this article says, be aware of your surroundings. Mm-hmm. So you made a conscious effort, right? Then it says in bold, look around and identify workplace hazards that could cause harm. Mm-hmm. Now, when you say that you're intentionally observant, and we're looking at this from a POC, BIPOC, all these awful terms that they call us. I call us historically ignored because that's what they do.
Right.
And when you're looking at it from that lens, identify a workplace hazard that could cause harm.
The people you work with.
Ooh. She's dropping it like it's hot.
It's simple as that, right? Mm-hmm. When you talk about identifying the workplace harm, part of that is identifying who exactly is in your midst. And understanding their intentions and what they're bringing to the table or what they're leaving off from the table or how they respond when you sit at said table. And also offer your expertise, right, in these conversations. So part of that is really understanding who is at the table with you, who you encountering every single day that wants to buddy up against you, but then is turning around and talking some stuff behind your back.
So this piece, look for ways to reduce or eliminate hazards. What does that mean to you? How do you translate that?
I mean, for me in the workplace, reducing, eliminating hazards is calling a spade a spade. So if you are, even through patience and observation, you still taking a tally of what's going on. Mm-hmm. So the time in which you need to speak up, right? Without fear or without hesitation, right? And even if it's talking about speaking up in the notion of creating a better office culture, because sometimes we have to get crafty before we get right to the point. Because every organization wants to see that you have the whole organization in mind and you're not just looking to address a singular problem that you have with a singular person.
Right.
So I think a lot of times we fall into the notion of not going the route of really addressing what's happening because we're too fearful of how other people are going to respond to us addressing it.
Yeah.
So I think we really need to, in my opinion, address it head on, because what festers is what's built and what's going to cause even more problems. And as a person of color, automatically our emotions are assumed to get into that. And then it creates something unnecessary.
I have to agree with you. And I also think about this too, like looking for ways to reduce and eliminate hazards when they decide that they're going to make that DEI or racial justice committee. Who's the first person they're coming to help them develop their strategy or understand the wrongs in a better way and re-traumatizing us, to be quite frank. Like, and we look for ways to be a part of that because we want to see the solution, right? But the next piece is take the time before starting a task and stop and look around your work area. That was the last piece. So coming full circle, right? We're intentional. Then we're identifying who's in the space, who's causing the harm. Then we're saying, okay, like now you guys, I've already spoken up, or maybe not, and you already know you're causing some harm. So now you want me to be a part of your committee. Now you want me to be a part of this project. Now you're looking for me to answer some of your questions. But before you decide to be a part of that, another piece of your observance, it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, Shalain, is that you need to stop and look around and see if that's even worth it. Is that even worth your time?
Yeah, because what you find in a lot of the work that I do, a lot of organizations are looking for quick fixes or to check boxes. Don't have me a part of your DEI committee or whatever, your race equity committee, if you're not invested in creating a plan. I'm not here to check a box. And so it's going to be an uncomfortable space. If you're not ready, don't have me part of the space.
Right.
And so I think people need to understand that when you're doing anything relative to DEI or race equity, you can't do a one-hitter quitter. A lot of these organizations, especially after George Floyd, right? They went on this path of implicit bias, implicit bias, implicit bias. That's fantastic, but that's only one part of an overall equity strategy. Because the reality is, even when we talk about implicit bias, if you are not committed to continuing the conversation, it's going to be for naught, because you're going to be everyone who was part of this implicit bias exercise, let's say, is going to be right back to square one if you're not continuing the conversation. But in the organization's mind, they check the box. I'm not part of that. Again, I'm over conversations. Let's talk about intentional and tangible solutions, and let's move the action towards that way.
I love that you say that, because it takes us into the second part of this particular article. It then goes into explaining the 8 steps of safety consciousness. Now, I was in a conversation recently where someone identified that white folks' safety is not in question when we are having a conversation that surrounds historically ignored groups. However, those who identify as historically ignored, safety is an issue for them. Right? So just because you have discomfort doesn't mean that you're unsafe. But for a person of color, or a person who comes from a historically ignored community, the safety issue is at the top of the list when it comes to speaking up, being observant, being patient. So I want to take you guys in this 8-step journey, right, that they decided to share with those who are being safe in the workplace or observant in the workplace. Now, I want to also iterate that this is not industry specific, but we can assume that this is for hazard individuals, those who are going through OSHA training and so on and so forth. So I want you to open up your minds to draw a parallel of these types of ideas and tips as it relates to the lived experiences of people of color in the workplace. So the 8 steps to safety consciousness. Number 1, know the job and be thoroughly familiar with the work plan. Now, you can stop me whenever, Shalain. Okay? Stop me whenever. Okay. Number 2, make, revise, and utilize a job safety analysis for tasks to be done. Sounds like a DEI strategy to me. Okay. Next one. Number 3, perform your own work in such a way that will not create or leave hazards which may cause accidents involving other employees. Obtain training, number 4, sorry. Obtain training in first aid and become familiar with knowing how to give artificial respiration. My mind is blown right now. I don't know about y'all, but
yeah,
when
you going.
Okay.
You go in a place, but get through all 8.
Okay, right. Number 5, take an active part in safety meetings. Number 6, report all hazards, unsafe practices, and accidents. Number 7, accept responsibility for using safety protective equipment on the job. And number 8, teach your own families, co-workers, and others about accident prevention. We're going to pause. Would you talk to me, Shalain? Am I bugging? Because if I'm bugging and I'm going off the rim, let me know. Let me know.
This is it's a lot. It's a lot in here. I mean, you can start with number 1, right? Number 1 was know the job and be thoroughly familiar with the work plan, right? Again, that goes back to what I said. Know what you have signed up for, right? Know the space that you're in. When you talk about knowing a job and knowing the space that you're in, that's the ins and outs of it. Know what's expected of you and what's not expected of you. A lot of times we find ourselves in these spaces, especially as a woman of color, of doing all this stuff because it's coming our way. Well, that's not in my work plan. That's not in my job responsibilities. Hello, somebody. Okay.
Hello, that's what my grandmother used to say. Hello, somebody.
Yeah. A lot of times we get fearful of speaking up and saying, but that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. Why? Because we feel like we are going to be retaliated against. Yes. And we automatically jump to the worst, right? Well, they're going to fire me, so I'm not going to say nothing.
Right.
And a lot of times fear stifles our knowing, right? We know it, but our fear is not allowing us to communicate the fact that we know this is out of pocket.
I mean, we only at number 1, y'all. Let's get to number 2. Make, revise, and utilize your job safety analysis for tasks to be done. So it sounds like Shalain set that up very nicely for us because we use Black women as an example. I'm taking on all this work, but that's not in my job safety analysis. That's not in my job description, right? So my tasks to be done are the ones that I signed up for. They're not additional duties. They're not additional committees. They're not additional, meetings. There's a preservation that has to happen. Mm-hmm. And when I make, revise, and utilize my analysis for my tasks, then I'm creating the boundaries in the work environment that need to be present so that I can now be safe.
Right. But also, and there's also the consideration of this understanding that when you're doing a full analysis, when you do an analysis of anything, you have to do cost and benefit. Mm-hmm. What is the cost of me participating in this? Yes. What is the benefit to me participating in this? And that's not selfish. A lot of times we think that those kind of things are selfish. But if me being on this voluntary committee is of no benefit to me, then I should not be pressed to do so simply because they need a Black face at the table.
And we see that a lot.
A lot.
I work with clients and sometimes it gets nauseating that they try to put faces in front of me for aesthetics because they're afraid that I'm going to see that their workforce doesn't reflect the type of work that they want me to do. And you always see it. It's not like it's a secret. You can see it. It's very apparent. So it brings me to this place. We're creating our boundaries. We know the job. We're creating our boundaries. We have cost and benefit. We have an analysis. Now, number 3 tells us to perform your own work. Own is capitalized. perform your own work in such a way that will not create or leave hazards which may cause accidents involving other employees.
Yeah.
I automatically go to any white person or any person who has acquiesced to systemic structures that are harmful to historically ignored communities. You need to recognize that your actions and the way that you do your work create and leave hazards, right, that involve other employees day to day.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I am a woman of color, but I'm not psychologically a woman of color, and I align with whiteness and white supremacy and its lens, I am now harming other people of color in my workplace because I'm not understanding or recognizing the systemic structures that are just completely harmful to them. Right? I'm okay benefiting, right, for my own self, and I could care less about anyone else.
You went where I was going to go with that. It's the benefit, right? So in that you shape shifted or you code switched, right? Because you saw the benefit of it instead of understanding that you're putting a gauze on an open wound, right? So even though you are trying to patch the wound, you're still bleeding and you're still leaving drops of blood everywhere. Your quote unquote brothers and sisters will still have to walk alongside or behind you.
Next part. Obtain a training. That one was so easy for me. But then the second, it says obtain training in first aid, right? And become familiar with knowing how to give artificial respiration. I don't know why that hit me so deep. That felt like a New Yorican cafe line. Like, I want to be like this. I want to be like this at the poetry slam. Because how I interpret that, right? And forgive me if I'm not as eloquent as I want to be. But how I interpret that is when we go through, like, a lot of people are very against trainings, like you mentioned, Shalain, implicit bias, right? Like, that is the basic of the basic when it comes to racial justice.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let me just put that out there. Or racial equity, healing, reckonings, all that. That implicit bias is the complete basic of the basis, the first part of the foundation. Some people are actually skipping it, but nevertheless, when you engage in a training in a workplace, right? You are becoming thoroughly familiar, and I'm just going to use the words of this safety consciousness plan. You are coming familiar with the lived experiences of other people and how they perceive themselves or are perceived in the workplace. Now, once you've been trained in that, it is your job, right, to know, like this safety plan says, how to give artificial respiration, which means breathing life into something. You have recognized your own, how you hold space or take up space, and you're willing to partner with other people so that your workforce doesn't feel excluded, so that there's a belonging and a wellness component that is attached to the workplace. Like, that's how I interpreted it. But talk to us, Shalain. How did you interpret that piece? Because I'll get super deep.
I think you're right. When my initial reaction to that sort of artificial respiration, right, almost brought me to a fake it till you make it kind of place, right? But in hearing you talk, right, it brings me back to something that whenever I do something related to implicit bias training or whatever, I leave people with the charge that once you know, you can't unknow. But not only can you not unknow, you have the responsibility to do something about it. Right? We're talking about civic responsibility to do something about it. And so I think that that's what that speaks to, right? You have a responsibility to now move accordingly, right? Once you're exposed to something and you're overexposed and you continue to be exposed to something, it should change how you view something. Now, if it does not change how you view it, that's intentional because you're not allowing it to change and you're going to be stuck in your own way.
And that's number 5. Take an active part in the safety meetings.
Yeah.
So take an active part. You give a call to action to those who engage in your trainings and those who need to be charged with the next step. And according to a hazardous safety plan, they believe the same thing. So I think it's easy for us to say, no, I'm not going to sum this up until we finish all 8. So number 6, right? So 4 and 5, clear cut. Number 6, report all hazards, unsafe practices, and accidents. I feel this part is completely avoided.
Oh, yeah.
There are so many times that professionals of color come to me and either want to be in community, want to vent, want to talk about, okay, can I strategize around this? And when the conversation of reporting comes up, whether it be to their supervisor, their direct supervisor, indirect supervisor, HR, the CEO, the board, it doesn't matter. There's never a safety around reporting hazards, unsafe practices, and accidents when it comes to people of color in the workplace.
No, because we automatically go into what the consequence is going to be if I report it, even if the consequence is not legally right. So part of what we have to do is understand what our rights are and where our rights lie within the workplace. Because that, to me, the power is in knowing what people can and cannot do to you. And a lot of times we don't know that. So we just shut up because our mind goes automatically to, well, I need this job. And I'm not doing nothing to upset nobody that's going to make it any harder for me than it already is for me to walk through this place in my skin.
If I had the flex drop a bomb, dun, 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 dun. I need some music effects. I need all that. Listen, if any of y'all out there are interested in, like, you know, making this platform look all cool and gadget like, and I could get some noises, yo, hit your girl up, okay? Like, all my contact information is right here on top. Hit me up because I need one of those dun 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 dun. Because Shalain just dropped a bomb. I had just had a conversation with my brother about this. People are not even recognizing that the EEOC is readily available for you. And any organization that discriminates against you, according to Title VII, if any discriminates against you for any of those protected classes reasons, you can report them. Yeah. If retaliation happens, if you make a report and they don't follow up on it, or you can prove that you have been discriminated against, you can go to the EEOC and file a complaint against them.
Yeah,
and speak with someone.
Yeah, in the state of New York, you don't even have to have concrete evidence. Okay, you can go and file a report based upon how you feel about something.
Well,
so the reality is, we don't know that though. Why? Because organizations don't hop on that or tell us that, or their policy on that is so buried within their employee handbook that we open the book and be like, anybody got time to read this 150 pages for the last page to be about what I do if I have a complaint of discrimination. Listen. So what happens? We go uninformed.
And then also, a lot of us don't believe that the laws pertain to us anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But in order for us to believe that the laws pertain, we have to know they exist.
Right.
And that's the part that I think a lot of people of color miss or are even hesitant. I've had somebody tell me one time that they didn't even want to look in the employee handbook for something because they felt like somebody was going to trace what they had looked up on their computer and use it against them. Because the employee handbook was nestled on the intranet of the agency. That's the type of fear that people of color are walking around in the workplace with every single day.
Every day. In 2022. After they had their George Floyd promises.
That part.
Anyway, we are deep. We're diving. It's uncomfortable. It is what it is, man. This is why community is so important, and this is why these types of conversations are so important. I recognize a lot of people who identify like we do kind of shy away from these types of conversations because they feel like they're re-traumatizing, or they don't want to have them, or it's just easier to talk about love and hip hop. But it's like we have to talk about these things in order for us to be more equipped and create boundaries in the workplace so that we could be safe. Like at this point, it's a safety issue. Right. If you're walking around with that type of fear, it's a safety issue. And that's why this conversation is so pertinent. Like it's very timely, super timely. Yeah, like, I just want to reach out to that person and be like, how do we get a lawyer on your side? Like, why are you scared to go into the employee handbook? And if that's the case, why did they not print out one for you so that you could have a hard copy of it?
But think about, like I said before, where the person mind goes to, right? If this is a job that they quote unquote need, right? They're not going to do anything to upset the ecosystem that's helping them sustain their life on outside of work. And that's where the fear lies, because we automatically go to the worst case scenario, right? We don't understand there's a lot of steps in between, and that legally you can't just fire me for that.
That's what I'm saying. Like the psychological warfare on our people is real. Yeah. Because a white person will write a letter so fast. They will write a letter to the CEO straight flaming them so fast and still be able to keep their job.
Signed by the
we scared to look up the handbook.
Right. Yeah. And I said, listen, well, come and look at it on my computer.
Let them come for me then. Hey, you know what? Stand in the gap. You understand? Stand in. All right, fine. I got your back. You want me to print it out for you too?
Right. Like, what you need? You want me to look at the human rights law too? Like,
okay.
What you need me to do?
Child. All right. This brings us to the accountability piece. Number 7 says, accept responsibility for using your safety protective equipment on the job. So once you've gone through all of this, what do? We know the job, right? We revised our safety analysis. We did benefits versus costs, right? We learned how to perform our work in such a way that, tries to not harm other people. We obtain trainings, right? We take an active part in those trainings. We learn how to report or gather evidence or policy evidence that could support whatever's happening, whatever reporting that's happening. Or if we decide that, something's unsafe and we want to speak up about it, we have a policy that could back us up in our back pocket. You don't bring that out to hold your spade now. Mm-hmm. Don't pull your spades out first. Okay. Hit the ace first. Don't pull out your spades. So the next piece is accepting responsibility for using your safety protective equipment. So once you've recognized all of this, as Shalain said, once you know it, you can't unknow it. Once you recognize all of this, you actually have to put this into practice. Mm-hmm. If you don't put it into practice, then it's useless.
That part.
And we don't want to be walking around useless anymore, right? We don't want to walk around. And when I say useless, I don't mean that our people are useless. What I mean is we're being so harmed in situations that we got high blood pressure, we got diabetes, we got people who overweight, we got all this type of stuff, all these ailments that come along with you. People angry, they can't heal, they got depression, they down and out, like you on drugs, you doing all these things because you're trying to cope with the traumas that you're facing from the racism that you have to endure every single day at work. You have to be responsible for your own survival. X that out, thriving in a space. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts about that.
I think that's right? Because a lot of times we fall into the space of the I don't know. Mm-hmm. But when you do know, you have now, again, the responsibility to utilize your tools accordingly. And if you don't know how to utilize your tools, all tools come with a manual. And even if that manual is another person who have had to use the tool previously, you now need to figure out how to use the tool.
Did y'all hear that? Look. Dun, 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 dun. All tools come with a manual, honey. You heard that? Let me say it again. All tools come with a manual. So you better go read it and
And
take
that's it.
responsibility
No
for your
matter
own
what
actions.
you
Take
think about,
responsibility for your own safety.
yeah, you think about any employee handbook, right? Employee handbooks, right, are riddled with references to what? Statutory regulations that exist where? In laws that are set up by what states?
Ooh.
Manuals. Go up the line. If I don't understand what this says in my employee handbook, my next thing is to let's figure out what the law actually says. And if I can't interpret that, let me find somebody to interpret that for me. Or even somebody that may have experienced what I'm going through and understand the route that they took, whether it was a route of action or inaction. Because part of this also is understanding why a person decides not to act when these situations come up. And
I'm
how
gonna need y'all to rewind that back. Hit the rewind button right here. So you could listen to what she said and how she traced the manuals back to state legislation. Y'all hit that rewind button. We gonna be right here when y'all come back. Dun 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 dun. Just drop it like it's hot.
literally think about it. Open any employee manual, and it's gonna have regulations and statutes and stuff that again are made from where? State laws that I'm gonna give you even one better. Follow suit with what? Federal laws.
Federal laws. Absolutely. And just because the law was passed, and I don't, we going into this, just because the law was passed doesn't mean that people are operating in the law. And I think that's really the piece, the gap that we're seeing in the workplace is that there are laws that protect people who come from protected classes. However, it doesn't mean just because a law is passed that people will operate in it and uphold those laws. And so if you don't know the laws, you don't know when it's been breached. And so that's what we're trying to share with you here today.
Right. And then the other thing to always consider is that laws are made by people. People have to enact the laws. So people are not infallible. Right? People don't ever look at the consequences, and they daggone sure don't look at the unintended consequences until it's too late and it's blaring in their face.
So number 8, teach your own families, coworkers, and others about accident prevention.
Spread the word.
Sounds pretty familiar, right? You guys are kind of engaging in that right now. So I just want to give you an opportunity, Shalain, to give us an example of how you've either used this safety consciousness tactic, either consciously or subconsciously. Like after we've gone through all 8 stages and we see like a correlation, we've been able to break it down. Have you seen yourself use this tactic? And if so, I just wanted to rephrase the question. And if so, have you used it consciously or subconsciously?
I think for me, there's parts of this tactic as far as all 8 steps that I've used consciously, but there's also the subconscious, right? When you talk about performing your work in a way that will not leave or create hazards, sometimes that goes into how you think about things and how you think about how you move about in the workplace, right? Because every person of color is not going to work right alongside you, right? So
Absolutely.
you know what I'm saying? Like ain't no agency stacking nothing like that,
No.
right? And so part of that is subconsciously understanding that how you move, especially in shared spaces, and how it can impact those that may not have a seat at the table. Right. And so I think there's the unconscious or the subconscious part of that. Right. But the conscious is all in that. Right. Taking an active part, understanding, what your job is. Like that's tangible. That's what you have to do. Right. Nobody signs up for something that they don't know what is expected of them. And if they do, they're hit with a myriad of surprises that leave them wondering why they even did this in the first place.
Right.
So you have to get out ahead of those kind of things, right? And then when you talk about reporting hazards and stuff like that, that's literally having the conversations, albeit uncomfortable. That's tangible. That's an action. You have to consciously do that. I could subconsciously talk in my mind all day, but if I You know what I'm saying? Like I can talk to myself all day. And then like I shoulda, woulda, should,
Right.
like, you know what I'm saying?
Or even telling people off in your mind, like, you better get away from me.
That's it. And all you read on my face is disgust. And now that translates to me being an angry Black woman in the workplace. Right?
We don't subscribe to that trope.
That's the truth that's out there.
I know.
Right?
I know.
And so that's what that translates into being. And so you have to consciously do that part.
Yeah.
And that teaching part, right? That's conscious too. You've been through it, somebody else going through it, come alongside them, right? Utilize your power together.
Mm-hmm.
There's power in experience. And who knows, your experience may be what they need to push them into action. Don't discount your experience or your exposures.
Okay, hold on. Because now we get into the next piece, right? We're going to talk about patience and its meaning. So we literally broke down observance to you in the workplace with the safety consciousness framework that, could be helpful or not helpful, right? But as we move out of observance, we need to discuss the patience piece, which is one of your tools that you bring into decision-making rooms. And so according to Oxford Dictionary, patience is the capacity to accept or tolerate delay, trouble, or suffering without getting angry or upset. So I want to explore patience as a concept of self-preservation or a silencer for people of color or people who come from historically ignored communities. So Shalain, can you tell us what your thoughts are about having patience versus being hesitant to speak up? Tell me a little bit about how that looks for you, like how you describe to us, like watching and observing are different. Patience and hesitance seem to be different as well. So give us a little bit of background about your thoughts around that.
So my main thing about hesitation is always rooted in fear. Mm-hmm. Right? There's something that's giving you pause from taking an action. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, like we've been speaking about, it's that fear of the what if. Mm-hmm. It's the fear of the what's next if I say something, or the ramifications of, they may fire me because I spoke up and my claim is unfounded, or they're going to blackball me from this and that. Right? Patience to me, on the flip side, is very intentional. Like we spoke about observation, right? Patience has to be intentional because, in my opinion, how I use patience, I'm gathering facts. Because a lot of times when we are impatient with something, we lead with our emotions. And when we're in the workplace, a lot of times our emotion or the perception of our emotions can stifle the perception of our performance. Mm-hmm. And so therein lies an issue, right? Because if I'm constantly assumed to be leading by my emotions, it's going to discount what I'm actually saying.
Yeah.
Especially as a person of color, especially as a woman of color.
I want you guys to recognize that we by no means think that this is right. We're just saying that this is the reality. Let's find ways to be in community and give each other tools and skills to challenge and antagonize those ideas, right? And it's not being the model minority. It's really like recognizing what's at stake. And so you have to have that self-preservation and not be silenced in that moment, but also have the patience, like Shalain is saying, in power to recognize that your patience is fact gathering. Yeah. Your observance is understanding the players, right? Like that strategy is super important. I don't want to talk like around you, but I just want to be very clear that you and I have had multiple conversations that we don't believe that the workplace is right. Like it's not right, but these are just realities that we have to share with you in order for us to like continue to expound on what thriving looks like for our people in this country.
Yeah, it's not right at all. But you can't ignore what it is. Right. And so I think that's important why we have these conversations and lift these things and talk about the challenges that people face every single day that go unspoken of because of the hesitation to speak about them.
Right. So the next piece that I want to talk about is so I changed my camera. Does that look better? I hate my lighting. It sucks. Hopefully they edit this piece. But nevertheless, nevertheless, so now we're gonna go into invited to the cookout. Ooh, invited to the cookout. Now, usually when we hear invited to the cookout, we're thinking about, white folks being invited to our shindigs. They be like, oh, that white person is swaggy. You invited to the cookout. Or that white person said something that was affirming to the Black community. Oh, you invited to the cookout. We're not talking about that. Today, we're going to discuss this concept, and use it to explore being invited to the table and being able to speak. So when I talk to clients, or like when I talk to individuals who are looking to diversify their staff or diversify their leadership, a lot of the times I use that example, like, who are you inviting to the table, and are they even allowed to speak? I've been in spaces where, like Shalain said, it's a checkbox. As long as I have your face, we're great. Mm-hmm. But if you want to speak up, now we have some issues, right? So I want to examine patience and observance, right? So since we examine patience and observance, I would like to explore the timing of speaking up. So in this recent viral post, I'm going to share my screen with you guys. We'll explore this post together because I want us to look at it as a group. Let me just get y'all ready here. Can you see this? Can you see this, Shalain?
Sure can.
Okay, awesome. So coconet.org did this amazing illustration of the woman of color and nonprofit, right? And it carries us through a journey from her inception, she enters into the organization, to her exit through the organization. So I'm gonna walk us through it. So she's in there, right? So like I said, I work with clients. They want to diversify their leadership. They want to diversify their staff. And so the woman of color gets in. The white leadership, it's a honeymoon. Oh my goodness. We can't believe you're here. It's so great. We're so happy.
It's the voice for me. I'm gonna need you to not use that voice anymore.
We've been waiting, but that's how it sounds to me sometimes.
I got
very Valley girlish. And I love my white people. I got white friends and all that, but they'll laugh too because that's how they're like, we don't sound like the generic white person, right? Like, it's funny to me. But anyway, so the honeymoon, white leadership is just like, yes, the woman of color feels welcome and needed and happy. They're like, yeah, we in it to win it. I'm so thankful for this opportunity. And we recognize that towards the side of, towards their cusp, we recognize that they're like a tokenized hire at this moment.
Checking a box.
So say that again. I'm sorry.
Checking a box.
Right. So the tokenized hire, we're checking the box. We're making sure that things are great. But then reality starts to set in, right? As we come around this curve. And the woman of color points out issues in the organization, right? She tries to work within the organization structure and policies, like Shalain was sharing with us. She recognized, what was expected of her. She was looking at the organization from a logical level. What is best for the organization? How can she utilize her skills? And then she pushes for accountability. But at this time, the reason that this sparked her speaking up was that there was repetitive injuries and macroaggressions. I call them macro. I don't call them micro because I don't think there's anything small about them. Mm-hmm. So she's getting repetitive injuries and macroaggressions. So she speaks up, right? And she's looking at the policies and she's looking at the structure. At that point, we come around the bend. We find that now they're in a space of denial. Oh no. This woman of color is problematic. How dare she come in here? Before she got here, everything was great. How dare she come in here and tell us that we need accountability and that our structures are inherently racist? So now the organization denies, ignores. Then they tell the woman of color, well, you fix it. I've heard that before. That's why I had to pause real quick.
Mm-hmm.
You fix it. On some Respucia, you do it, right? you, you do it, right? So then what they do, this part just irritated me because I've experienced this piece. Then they pit the people of color against each other. The ones who had seemed to be satisfactory in the organization, they now go to, and now sipping has happened behind the back of the woman who, highlighted that she's being macroaggressed or having multiple or repetitive injuries against.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, as you can see, the woman exits the organization because there's retaliation, right? The woman decides, the organization decides that the woman of color is the problem and she's targeted. And they label her as a conflict and says that she has a communication issue, or they use this terminology called not a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this post went viral, okay? Like, so many women are just like, this is exactly what I've experienced. This looks way too familiar. This is even triggering in some ways because my goodness. So, Shalain, like, what do you think occurs here? On a deeper level, if you'd like to explain to us how you interpreted this. And then from there, I would love to go into story time if you have experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
And let's exchange some stories with the audience so that they can see that this is real.
Yeah. The deeper level to me is not that deep. I think for me, the outskirts of it being a tokenized hire is just what it is. Everybody wants to check a box, but they don't want to do the work to understand that there is safety required for people of color in this workplace. That's a requirement, right?
Absolutely.
You can't tell me you have an inclusive workplace and then you have, as you would say, the macroaggressions occur, the injuries continue to occur, and the stifling occur when someone speaks up about it. So much so that you attribute it to not being a good fit as if I put on the wrong size shoe. But I was a good fit for your organization when you hired me based upon the qualifications you thought I carried or how I presented myself in an interview. My shoes were fitting right then.
Wasn't it? In our honeymoon phase.
In the honeymoon phase. But now that I'm calling to the carpet the things that you all are doing, all of a sudden it's a communication issue. But it's not a communication issue on my end because communication requires both parties speaking and coming together for a solution.
Mm-hmm.
But you cannot rest the solution solely on me when I'm the one that brought the communication issue to you.
Listen.
And then what happens, right? We're not a good fit, but they can't outright fire us. But they make it so uncomfortable that they don't want us to be there.
Yep.
And we don't want to be there anymore because it no longer is worth it.
My mental, emotional, and physical health is at risk right now. And I must exit. There's no way that I can stay here.
Right.
I can't. This is super harmful. And I recognize this in organization after organization after organization, and nothing changes. And they are super sinister to me. I find these types of organizations to be deplorable. And I honestly feel like, as a business owner, I would never wish that someone's business goes under, but I do wish that they take a significant hit, because you should not be able to function in this way where you're harming people left and right. You're ruining people's lives, and you continue to function as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah, because they are unwilling to understand who they hire. Because
I feel
everyone that they hire is going to conform to an ideal that they perpetrate through the culture of their workplace. because of what they believe they heard in an interview setting.
Agreed. I also recently had a conversation with a intellectual who is also a professor at a college, and she shared that what she found was all of the trainings that they had endured at that particular institution were rooted in, anti-racism frameworks, and they were learning white supremacy and whiteness, and the lens that is harmful to historically ignored groups. And what they found was the individuals who had the most influence and power on the institution were using the information in a gaslight form to manipulate the institution into like working against or undermining the work of, the reckoning or the work of anti-racism work. Mm-hmm. And they asked me like, how do you feel about that? And I was like, I find that to be super sinister, because that means you know exactly what you're doing.
Oh yeah, that's intentional.
And I'm stuttering a little bit because it gets me super angry. I have to absolutely say this, and I've said this before and I still stick to this. If you are a white person who holds position and power and you do nothing to hold space, or not even hold space, move and allow for space, or you have nasty rhetoric that you're spewing, or you are continuing in your harm when you have been introduced to the lived experiences of people of color, you are flat out racist. Period. I know the worst thing you could ever do is call a white person racist, but hey, if the shoe fits, if it walk like a duck, quack like a duck, then it must be a duck. There is no, like, so for me, it's like, oh, they don't understand the person that they got. I guess because I recognize that sinister lens, it's like they do know the person that they got, because their last action after the person, after they went through this denial period, was to make the space so uncomfortable that this person had to exit. So that was a conscious effort of discomfort and unsafety for that person that they knew would work.
Right. And when I say they didn't know the person that they got, you can see me as a person of color, but you don't know how I'm going to react in your workplace. You can see me for my qualifications, right? But you may not know that I'm going to stand up for myself, because maybe their exposure to other people of color in their workplace has been one of them not standing up for themselves, right? And so then the tactic becomes to make you so uncomfortable because you stood up and you've challenged our status quo, right? To make you so uncomfortable that you leave, because you are now a danger to my power over dynamic. Instead of you inviting me into your organization because you have this lens of understanding that I'm here as a power with dynamic. So if I'm a threat to your power over, you're going to do whatever it takes to push me out legally, right? Because if I'm not doing anything egregious, you can't just fire me without there being some sort of consequence to you and your pockets.
These are still very sinister. And I find myself
getting an intentionality behind
it. Yes, like it's intentional. It's very intentional. And I'm not in the business of making excuses for people. And so based on what we just saw, this inception and exit of a woman of color in an organization that was literally just chosen for their tokenism, I want to ask you, like, how do we know what type of organizations will behave in this way? Can you think of some clear identifiers that we can look for to, that an organization would function in this way? What are some identifiers?
That they would, or that they wouldn't function in
that
this
way? They would. because we're talking about prevention. So I'm looking for a position. I'm, canvassing organizations that I would want to work for. I'm in these interviews. What are some clear identifiers that an organization would function in this way?
I think for me, one of the things that whenever I'm interviewing is I always ask about organizational culture. Now, to me, two things, right? It's understanding who they employ, right? Every organization is going to post somewhere who they employ, right? Whether it's in an end of the year report, especially when you're talking about nonprofit organizations, end of the year report, this is what our diversity looks like, right? But if I ask you in an interview, what's your culture like, and you struggle to tell me, that's a red flag. That's a red flag. Because there's something that you are protecting that is negative about your culture that you are afraid to slip out in your answer.
Mm-hmm. And why are you even protecting that?
Right. Why are you even protecting that? So if you can't answer that question for me in an interview, I have an issue. If you tell me in an interview that your organization has been focused on diversifying their workforce, red flag. Why are you intentionally telling me that you want to focus on diversity? Like, why is that? Why in my interview are you harping on that?
Yeah.
Red flag. So those are two big ones for me, because that's the number one question I ask in interviews. Tell me about your work culture.
Yeah.
What does it look like? What does your executive suite look like?
Yeah.
What is the opportunity for mobility in your organization? Who gets to move?
Yeah.
Right. And so depending on those type of answers, you can quickly understand what's happening at that organization and where their efforts have lied to make it an organization that is accepting truly of people of color coming into the table, lending their time and their talents to the mission of that organization.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. And I would even add further, like we had an episode with Queen Zaquetta, and she talked about authenticity in the workplace. And I want to be very clear, when you're going to these interviews, you're interviewing them. Like a lot of us really want the position, you want to look good. But if your resume got pulled and you were chosen for an in-person interview or a Zoom interview or a phone call, you already proved that you belong in that space anyway.
Yeah.
So at that point, you should bring your authentic self and let them see it and respond to it accordingly in the interview process, because that is an indication of whether or not they would be able to handle you in your authentic space, in your authentic self, right? Like, so being very upfront about who you are, is very important. And if they respond to you in a negative way, then you already know, hey, this might not be the place for me. Another thing that I recognize too is doing your research is very important.
Mm-hmm.
You should be looking on the company's website. You should be reading their Glassdoor. You should be understanding what people have experienced previously in their ecosystem before you go in there thinking that it's the best job for you. And take it from me, I have been in some really disgusting places because I'm just like, I want to do the job and keep it pushing. I didn't do the research that was necessary. That's why I'm so research heavy right now, because I just don't want to make those mistakes again. And I learned as I became an adult that the more research you do, the more information you have, the better your decision is going to be.
Yeah.
So really taking that ownership, like we had our safety consciousness, 8 steps to safety consciousness. One of them was taking ownership over your own sphere, what your responsibility is. So another piece is taking that. And then the last one that I want to share is, if you ask an organization or you ask someone in the organization, are you ready to actually address systemic oppression and how it plays out in your organization? And they now, no organization will be perfect. Not there, there's no organization that's going to be perfect. We have been indoctrinated in this stuff. The undoctrination, I think that's the proper way to say it, to be unindoctrinated in this requires dismantling. We are not there yet. And so you are going to be in some spaces where people are just doing foolishness. Mm-hmm. However, you once again can have that proactive view so that you're not falling into this type of situation where this woman of color went in, she was a token, and immediately after she shared how she was experiencing it, she had to exit the organization because they weren't ready for her. So be proactive.
100%, you know, and I think the research key is so important because you want to know exactly who is in front of you, right? A lot of people take jobs being enamored by the salary, and I get it. It. But then you end up in a space where you're like, oh man, I just sold my soul because of some money. And now I'm miserable. And now I'm pleading with my old job to take me back so that I don't have a gap in income as I'm looking for the next one. And all of that could have been, some of that, I'm not going to say all, the majority of that could have been mitigated had you just taken some time to do a little bit of research on the company that you're applying to.
Yes. And also recognize, guys, that this is the employee's time. Like, organizations don't have the control anymore. There was a mass exodus. They called it the
Great Resignation.
Yes, the Great Resignation. And with that, there was a shift in power. And so now you, as the candidate, potential candidate, employee, you really hold a lot of the power in the organizations that we work for, agencies we work for, state entities, federal entities. You really hold the power now. Now it's being talked about on a hush hush nationally, but it really is a real thing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, most organizations are going to move on you very quickly because they want to make sure they don't lose you because they know that you hold the power. So remember that power and positionality mean a lot. And as we as a community start to gain more power outside of social power, and we're moving into a more economic power space or a political power space, we need to use that to our advantage and not perpetuate the same systems and structures that we've seen that white supremacy has played out with. So it's like we ourselves have to change the game. So do your research, you know, and try to avoid, be preventative in the ways, be preventative in your job search, be preventative in your work search, because you don't want to find yourself in an ecosystem where you're continuously being harmed. Like, we're trying to disrupt that, right? So this conversation is to disrupt some of that.
Yeah, and I think for me, I would just switch the word preventative to being intentional, right? There's a level of intentionality even to be preventative.
Right.
And so I think I would switch it to intentionality. And I think my final thing I would say as far as this particular part of it is, don't ever go to an interview without a question. Don't do it.
If you ain't got no questions, you probably don't need to work there.
Yeah. Don't do it. Right? We're asking deep questions, but if you're not even willing to ask surface questions, you signing up for any and everything, and they may take advantage of that.
Listen, if you ain't asking no question, you probably don't like that. Listen to your intuition.
That's it, and that's so big. That's so big. Man, listen.
Hey, y'all heard it here. Dun, 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 dun. Shalain, bring your calculator, do the math. Nah, every time I hear that, I just think blow the whistle. Y'all know when that song come on, y'all hit the dance floor. Stop acting like Too Short wasn't there. Nevertheless, I'm dating myself. But bring your calculator, do the math. That's what we're going into. This is the last segment of our podcast today. So it's tool time, guys. All right. We come full circle for our last portion of today's conversation. And Shalain, you shared what tool you would bring with you to the decision-making boardroom. Now I'd like to go in depth and share with our audience some solution-oriented tools that can help combat these workplace environments that by default cause us harm. Now, we shared a whole lot with you today, but we're going to try to, like, you know, make a scope for you instead of it being all over the place. Be a little bit more focused. So, Shalain, give us your top 3 tools that are literal that you use to navigate workplace spaces.
I think my first literal tool is really documentation. I am known for documenting.
Get a calculator, do the math.
Listen, and when the math ain't mathing, let's call it to the carpet.
Okay. When the math ain't mathing. I love that. Listen, she's so New York, y'all. We are so New York. Okay.
I am known for, so again, this goes back into observation and patience, right? And investigation, right? And knowing when you have the opportune time to let the floodgates open. I am known for documenting. I have documents on my computer that are locked, that document issues that I have had, things people have said. And when it's time to call the carpet, now I have a roll call and tell me, I dare you to tell me that these things did not happen. Right?
I got timestamps, names, witnesses, camera angles, everything.
Why? Because a lot of times, again, when we bring something up, it's attributed to emotion. No. Let's attribute this to facts.
Facts.
Because this is what happened. And when you lead with fact, followed by emotion, I feel like the ears are a little bit more open. Because when you go in hot, they quick to go on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So now let me unscroll this for you and show you all of that. Okay?
You know the scroll that used to be and go on the floor? All right.
And again, and this is more of a covering yourself should you need to address something.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it doesn't necessarily mean you have to just document when something is blatant or when something is big.
Mm-hmm.
Little macro aggressions, right, that we talked about that are occurring that at some point in time it's going to lead to something else, and now you have a track record of behavior. Okay, that's one of my main things. Second,
dun, dun, dun.
My second thing is, I don't know if you would call this a literal tool, but I'm gonna go here. Trust your instinct.
Y'all heard it here.
We just talked about that, right? Trust your instinct. If it's off, it's off.
The vibes never lie. The vibes never lie.
Stop being afraid of your own instinct.
Mm-hmm. Trust yourself.
Trust yourself.
I like that.
That is so literal
like
because you have to learn how to do that in the workplace, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Trust yourself. If it is off, it is off. And if you're not ready to address it at that moment in time, go back to what I said the first thing to do. Document it.
I love that, Shalain, man. Trust yourself.
Right. Trust that you know what you experienced and you know how it made you feel.
Right.
A lot of times we get into the space of, oh, maybe I was overreacting. No, you had a visceral reaction to something somebody did to you. Trust that reaction was appropriate for what was occurring at that time.
Right. Believe people of color, baby.
Believe yourself. You would believe it if somebody else came to you and told you it was happening. So why you don't believe it when it's happening to you?
Gaslighting. We get gaslit so much.
Right.
And you feel like you get like this lack of confidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think my third thing goes back to what we spoke about before. Know your workplace, know your laws, know what's right, what's wrong, what's legal, what's illegal, know who you work with, know the ins and outs of where you spend the majority of your time. The majority of us spend our time in a workplace, whether that's through a day, through a week, whatever the case may be. I'm not spending my time in nowhere that I don't know or can't half predict what's finna happen. Period.
Whoop. Period. Wait.
Right? But that's the observation part. right? Because when you first get into a workplace, that's my number one thing. I need to see how y'all move around here.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times, and we were talking about this before, a lot of times I'm just taking stock of what I'm seeing.
Right.
Right. And internally understanding if it's a trigger for me and I need to address it, or if it's something that I just need to lock it back there until it's time to address, or if it ever needs to be addressed. But you have got to know your workplace and know yourself in that workplace.
Right. I love it.
Those would be my top 3.
I mean, those sound amazing. I would put those 3 tools in my back pocket. I don't know about y'all, but I'm walking away with 3 tools in my back pocket that I know are going to help me as I navigate these workplace spaces. So, Shalain, share your thoughts around how these tools can, help you in the moment and possibly change over time. So, I know you talked about the moment, so perhaps you don't have to answer that piece, but are these tools that change over time, or is this something that's a constant for you?
I think for me, those 3 tools that I talked about, right? Knowing where you are, where you're working, who you are in that workspace, knowing to trust yourself, and doing, did I say doing your research? What was the third one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you said observing and knowing your
Yeah,
space,
yeah.
knowing the work.
I don't think that ever changes as a tool.
Okay.
Because I think that as things change around you, you still need to know what's going on. And so I think knowing yourself or trusting yourself, that's evolving, right? That's a constant state of change, right? And I think a lot of times our level of trust depends on our comfortability in a situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the more that we better understand ourselves, our triggers, our traumas and those things, the better we can really trust how something is impacting us consistently.
Right.
So I think that's the main one that probably varies over time and situationally. Because there's sometimes that something can be happening so egregious to you that you literally don't trust yourself to act in that moment because you know your reaction is going to be big.
Happened to me the other day.
Right?
My integrity was questioned. Y'all want me flip this table now or flip it later?
Right. But, right, you didn't flip the table, I'm assuming.
No.
Okay, right.
I'm still here.
Right. You knew, but right, you knew though that you were so upset that you would do these things, but you were confident that you can hold that in and move forward. Yeah. Right? But that's a confidence and a trust that you've built in yourself navigating these spaces over time.
Yeah.
That's absolutely. Why I say that is an ever evolving process.
Right. I love that. Thank you so much for that. So guys, we want to leave you with a little bit of food for thought, right? MIT and Harvard created a toolkit for fostering employee well-being. And I don't know if you guys will be in the Albany area, but my organization will be providing a workshop at the New York State Black Expo on November 19th on employee wellness and belonging. And so as we talked about all these triggering aspects, you have to have observance, you have to be patient, you have to have a safety plan, you have to recognize, what type of organization you're working for, when to speak up, when not to. Am I tokenized? Am I not tokenized? Am I going to be retaliated against because I spoke up about something? What are the laws? Like, we talked about a lot today, guys. We threw a lot at you. So to close out, we would love to tell you share with you what MIT and Harvard's toolkit approach is for employee well-being. Now, I want to make this very clear. These tools are not rooted in anti-racism, and it's our job to ensure that we are only adopting these tools as a means to currently navigate until true change in policy and systemic reform happens. I want you to recognize that. Like, I didn't use anything that was rooted in anti-racism. We rooted it ourselves by pulling out the meat and spitting out the bones. So I want you to do the same thing with this toolkit. So this approach features like identifying the root causes of poor worker health and employee management partnerships. So as a result of, this woman of color entering into this organization, all of those macroaggressions that she was that were inflicted on her, and those harms that were inflicted on her, do have a physical and emotional effect on how she navigates, right? And so poor worker health can be a part of this conversation. We perhaps would not use that terminology to describe that for a woman of color or for someone who comes from a historically ignored community, but just vibe with us for a second. And then employee management partnerships, managing up, having those conversations like, this makes me feel like this, or that's out of my job description. These are some tools that you can use so you can kind of navigate a little bit better. So the work design principles, they have 3 of them. The first one is giving employees more control over their work. So one of your management partnerships one of the tools that you could use in your employee management partnerships, whether you're the manager or the employee, is giving employees more control over their work, right? So you want to advocate for more control and autonomy over the work that you do. The second one is tame excessive work demands. So as Shalain shared with us, while you're creating your analysis, your cost versus your benefit, you want to tame those excessive work demands. So you want to have that open communication with your manager, allow them to give you more control, or if you're a manager, stop being a micromanager, period. And allow for your workforce to have, less excessive work demands, and really intentionally spreading out that workflow in a more effective way. And the last work design principle, which is number 3, is improve social relationships in the workplace. A lot of people are getting upset about us talking about DEI. Oh my God, I have to talk about my feelings all the time. I'm tired of it. But really getting people to understand who you are as an individual, and having that social relationship in a very professional way, helps the workflow, helps connections and movement to happen, and it helps people have the ability to be their authentic selves, because now they're sharing not only a professional space, but they have the ability to share their personal selves should they choose, right? And the last part is plan and implement what this looks like, and make sure that it's a work design for health, right? So you want to get people into a space where they're mentally, physically, and emotionally safe.
Yeah.
So, do you have any thoughts about that, Shalain?
I'll share this about number 2. When you talk about taming excessive work demands, I have learned over the years in my work, especially in work that requires a lot of thought, I put boundaries into place. If you pay me to work 8 to 4, that's what I work.
That's what I work.
Work.
You saw how serious she was, guys? That's what I work.
and again, my my supervisor is really anytime he has to call me outside of those hours, the first thing he says, "I'm so sorry."
Right.
But that lets me know that you
respect
that there is a boundary in place, and whatever it is probably not a life or death situation, so it can be handled between the business hours of 8 a.m. and 4 p.m.
My hours are from. My hours are from.
But that's how I have to that's how I have to put in a boundary, and that putting in that boundary protects my mental capacity, because my mental capacity cannot be 24/7 filled with work. You cannot function that way.
Exactly.
You cannot, and you have to be unapologetic in speaking up about that.
Dun, 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 dun.
Unapologetic, because at the end of the day, and I'm going to say it flat like this, if you die, your job is posted in 24 hours.
Listen, they will move right along.
So if you're not concerned about your own well-being, how could you expect your job to be?
Exactly.
Your job is going to respond to what your requirements are for your well-being, and you have to be steadfast in that. And I
Thank you
learned
so
that
much.
the hard way.
You learned it the hard way.
The hard way. The hard way. And I vowed to myself, never again
That's
would
it.
I be in a position where boundaries did not exist.
I
Some may
love
say,
it.
you're crazy, you're harsh. It is what it is. That's what I have to do to protect myself. Because they want the best out of me when I show up every day. And I want to be able to show up as my best self because I enjoy the work that I do.
Right. That's real. That's super real. I thank you for that. Guys, if it's anything that you walk away from today with is really being, like Shalain said, intentional and preventative in how you show up in a space, you have the power to do that. Recognizing that. Please recognize, like, these people, these job places, these ecosystems, they cannot walk all over you. They're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to take advantage of you. And I hope that you walk away from today with some tools in your back pocket on how to be intentional and preventative in that way. I just want to say thank you so much, because that is it for us today, guys. And hopefully she would love to come back for a part 2. Shalain, I just want to thank you for gracing us with your presence, your intellect, your kindness, your just observance and patience in these spaces and the work that you're already doing for our community. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being a part of Black and Beautiful Chit Chat Connections.
You are so welcome. Thank you for allowing me to inhabit this space with you today. Thank you for the work that you are doing. Thank you for the words that you are spreading, the necessary words, the intentional words, to really create this community of power, right? You know, power, but also walking unapologetically in purpose.
I might have to
So
change.
thank you.
I might have to change my professional platform with an authentic twist. You didn't have so many lines today. We have to pull some of them out. My goodness, you are amazing. Please let us know, how do we reach you? What are your handles? Like, can we follow you? What does that look like?
Yeah, you can follow me on I'm probably most active on Instagram, to be honest. So you can follow me at Juslainey, so Juslainey. If you decide to venture over to Facebook, you can follow me at Shalain Nicole. And you know, you can see my spelling of my first name there. Those are the best ways to follow me. And if you really trying to get a hold of me, go on and drop me a little email to my Gmail at shalain.garcia@gmail.com.
And guys, I'm going to put all that information in the description box below. So all you have to do is click it, follow her, and keep up with her work. Guys, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. As you can see, all of our information is at the top of this screen. We love you. We thank you. Thank you for being a part of our Black and Beautiful family. This is episode 6, season 2 of Black and Beautiful Chit Chat Connections, a podcast where we uplift the experiences of people of color in the workplace with a professional platform and an authentic twist. Thank you so much for being with us. We can't wait to see you again. I always mess this one up. May God bless you and heaven smile upon you. We'll see you again later, guys. Peace.
Later, y'all. Thank you.